So welcome everybody to our soft skills community of practice for February. We have a number of folks that have registered but have not joined the call as of yet. That's totally fine. Hopefully they are able to gain something out of this asynchronously. So the first thing I'd like for us to do is we're just going to do a very, very brief icebreaker. And it's through a tool that we like to use called Mentimeter. And so I'm going to ask you all to go to the website menti.com and enter in the code 4343435. So I'm going to go ahead and make active our presentation. So it's menti.com and it's code 4343435. And as you do that, I want you to consider these. There's two icebreaker questions. So the first one, and they're opposed to each other. So the first one is, what is one word that describes obstacles to success for you? So for example, an obstacle to success for me right now has been taking care of kids at home. And when I say an obstacle to success, of course, I'm talking about getting certain things done, but having to deal with the schooling from home and just working from home and all of that. So that could be an obstacle to success. So think about something that might be an obstacle to success for you, either in this current moment or something that, oh, sorry, the code has changed. There we go. 6488901. And think about an obstacle success. And when you have it, just go ahead and enter it in on your Menti, and it will then populate on our screen. Perfect. Great. I'm sure there are some people are seeing some things in common, even though we've got all different words. I know that there are folks who relate to these at different times. And so I've always encouraged, anytime we're trying to achieve success or push others towards success, one of the first steps is identifying those things that are getting in the way of it. So this is just a quick check on that.
Okay, can I give kudos to the person who may have just put the most understated answer was pandemic. But that's way to hit to the point there. Someone is very succinct.
Okay, so now in opposition to this thought, what is one word that describes your efforts that lead to success? So when you find yourself succeeding, what is it that you are able to do that overcomes that which was an obstacle? I think somebody wrote connection on both of them, which is interesting. Great. Certainly, and we all know, especially in this room, that it's way more than just stating the opposite word to what we just stated, but it's rather the work that goes in identifying both the obstacles and then identifying that which helps us succeed. And so I want to thank you all for contributing to that icebreaker. This and the previous page will be shared as a screenshot with you in your in the resources that we'll include in the follow-up email. But I just wanted to ground us in that because one of the things that we're going to get a chance to do today is we're going to get a chance to hear from Alison Barker, who's from Cowen's Earn and Learn program. And she's going to kind of talk about how integrating the soft skills into the Cowen's Earn and Learn program, the process of that was kind of identifying the obstacles and then identifying what was successful and merging the two. And so that's that. I think we've all hopefully, well, I feel like we've all been in that place. All right, thank you very much. So as always, we like to ground ourselves within our shared goal that New Orleans Public High School graduates will thrive economically as a result of being the most sought after talent for hiring and advancement in our region's high wage career pathways. And so at Youth Force NOLA, that's the work that we wake up thinking about. That's how we ground our meetings. That's how we ground our efforts. And so we just want to make sure we start with that at the top of the meeting. So we are going to go through this. The timing at the end is a little bit off, but we will adjust accordingly as we go. And we should be out of here by about 1:45 or 1:50. All right. So before we get started on the work of looking into this month's building block, I just want to make sure that we understand what the skill building blocks are that we're referring to. And so we at Youth Force NOLA, and those of you who are in this meeting are familiar with MHA Labs' 6 building blocks. And so within the 6 building blocks, there are 35 power skills, or the soft skills. And those 6 building blocks are those which you see in front of you: personal mindset, planning for success, social awareness, communication, collaboration, and problem solving. And so these 35 power skills then become the soft skills that we really work with our young people on developing and honing in on. The big reason why MHA Labs and this framework stands out to us is because of the ease at which these skills are accessible on a language side. So it's a non-biased language. It's based in strengths. There was a ton of research that went into how these words were determined to be the words that make up the power skills. Youth were involved, adults were involved, different occupations and industries. And so we really think that this framework rounds out our soft skills work. In addition to that, identifying the soft skills is not just about naming them. Building of the soft skills is immensely valuable and immensely important. And we must understand that the development of these skills, that are sometimes also referred to as 21st century skills and power skills, is dependent on us as youth leaders to implement. So we have to recognize that there are some foundations in building these skills. The steps are critical in establishing an environment and process that promotes skill development, that reveal the target skills, establishing evidence, focusing the activity on the skill, plus recognition, meaning making, assessment through feedback, and engagement. And so if you were really clever, you've noticed that all of those things help make up our acronym there, which is REFRAME. And that just so happens to be the basis of our Introduction to Soft Skills workshop. And the next one that we're going to be looking at, or the next soft skills workshop, that happens in March. And so if you have other colleagues who are interested or are going to be new to this work, we'd love to see them in March. There will be a link to that at the end of the slideshow. So this month's building block that we're going to just quickly dive into is that of communication. And the building block of communication is one that happens in a sequence. And so you have to understand that communication as well as problem solving are kind of like hinged together. And so the organization that I've included on this slide, I tried to articulate it in a way that on the left-hand side, before the communication sequence is completed, there can be some blurry or foggy or unclear moments. But on the right, after the steps of communication are fully fleshed out, you can have a clear message. And so hence the blurry picture. Don't worry, your eyes are not tricking you. You don't need 3D glasses, as Ramel thought the other day. It's just the same image, just one blurred and one clear. And so these 5 steps of communication are so important to develop within our young people. Um, and when we say developing skills, it goes back to that previous slide, which is revealing the skill. So for example, revealing that organizing your information that serves the purpose of the message, context, and audience is a skill. That's the first part of communication. And so when you're developing communication skills with your young people, think of these 5 components and think of them being linked together. And so as it is a skill, it also needs practice. And we usually find lots of communication happening with our young people in and around us. But taking advantage of those opportunities as a skill building moment is not something that we always do. If you do, tip of the cap to you. I know I certainly didn't take advantage of it all the time. So some of the more common formal opportunities, whether, if these are more school related, but formal essays or formal speeches, or guided discussions, if you have a focus group, or if there is a panel where you give students a formal thing with which they're going to discuss, or if you have them work on pitches or presentations. So those are formal opportunities, and they usually are accompanied by some sort of rubric or some sort of evaluative tool that the students are aware of. It's a little easier to build those skills in that environment. But there's also informal opportunities. So things like exit tickets, emails, texts, even the nonverbal communication that you see on Zoom. The other day we had a call with 23 young people who applied for an evaluation committee. And there was one young man who was actively listening so well that I couldn't help but privately chat him and say, your active listening skills are amazing here. You're just so locked in. And I could see him like brighten up in the Zoom. And so just even those informal opportunities are great ones to take advantage of. So the key then in identifying or in being able to build skills in these informal and formal opportunities is that your youth know what your expectations are. And so this bottom half of this slide is just an example. I was a former English teacher, and so these were 2 ways that my students were aware of my expectations of communication. And this was through which we operated in the class. And so we had one rule that helped establish some ground rules, and that was that everybody speaks once before anybody speaks twice. And then the second one was we used this acronym SOAPSTONE, which it's from AP Central. It's one of their strategies. But basically SOAPSTONE, whoops, let's see, did it again. SOAPSTONE is a speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, situation, and tone. And so that acronym helped my young people, my students, understand how they were to organize their communication. And it sort of goes along well with the soft skill of communication that we just broke down. So that's just a little bit about the communication building block, which is critical. About how we skill build, the fact that skill building needs practice and needs feedback. There we go. And also just an example that goes along with it. You may have some that you're thinking of in your head right now, or you may be thinking of opportunities that you can refine some of your own communication practices or standards within your group. So as you do think of those things, I want to encourage you to make sure, as with all feedback, that we stay objective based on the thing we're evaluating, making sure we're restating our expectations, rooting our feedback in evidence, identifying those specific steps, and then providing suggestions, next steps, or examples. Okay. And then lastly, I think it's very important that we get to know who it is that we are providing feedback to. I saw something the other day or today of a professor in California that's been dismissed because they were berating a student who's hard of hearing over a Zoom meeting. I mean, how do you do that? But you don't. You get to know your students and you provide feedback appropriately. So yeah, so that's that. That's on communication. And I forgot to mention at the top of the show, but if anybody has any thoughts, questions, concerns, please drop them in the chat. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and shift a little bit here out of communication, and we're going to move on to hearing from Alison from Cowen in just a minute. But before we do that, I'd like for you to think about, I've just talked a lot about communication. Think about your go-to soft skill building block. And if you can just drop that in the chat for us. So some of us just have a go-to building block, and that's something that we relate to well personally, and so therefore we kind of find teachable moments with it, or we find opportunities for that, and it just always seems to come up. So we're having a lot of problem solving and personal mindset, planning for success. Great. Good. Thank you all. You know, it's funny. We talked about this the other day in a staff meeting, but nobody said social awareness. That's one that I don't know if we're all doing a, a great job of that. That may be something that we need to work on.
Next webinar topic for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, excellent. Well, thank you all. You know, Zooms are weird. I feel like I just spoke at you, but I did see a lot of nodding and a lot of active listening. So thank you all for that. Hopefully you gleaned something from it. The little PDF on the soapstone will be shared. The slide deck will be shared with you with all live links in it. So, you know, please make sure that you take a look at that afterwards. All right. We're going to shift it a little bit here. So, as we all know, great programs aren't just created. A lot of work goes into what makes them special. And so today's COP member and contributor, Alison, is going to share with us some insights and experiences that were gained while giving an already solid foundation the support that it needed for students to thrive. So just because something has a good foundation doesn't mean it's going to grow. And so Alison discovered that. She really did a great job of merging MHA Labs tools with their existing programs. And so Alison's been the manager of instruction and academic partnerships at Cowen's Earn and Learn program for the past 4 years. And prior to that, Alison taught both college and middle school. So 2 groups of know-it-alls, but at different ends of the spectrum. And so let's just give Alison our warm virtual welcome. And yeah, thanks, Alison. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
Thanks so much, Nathan. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. I'm excited to hopefully, in telling our story, resonate with something that y'all are thinking about. You could go to the next slide. So, Earn and Learn, who are we? I'm going to give you guys hopefully a brief rundown. We serve 18 to 24-year-olds with HiSET or a high school diploma with a little bit of work experience. Usually they've got around a year or more. And we provide paid entry-level placement in skilled crafts pathways such as electrical, construction, as well as computer hardware. So we partner with employers who provide those entry-level positions and provide the salary for that. We also provide certification resources so that folks can get a cert that will advance them along that pathway, looking towards post-program advancement. And our program tends to run from 6 to 9 months. Next slide. All right, so 4 years ago, when I came on board, Earn and Learn was like around 2 years old. It had already been running for a little bit. And I inherited 2 sets of curricular materials. And I'm telling this story in the hopes that it reaches somebody who wants to discuss it further or can connect with this in some way. We had social emotional materials that were high quality, really well researched, lots of cognitive behavioral concepts like anger management, a lot of identity work, me maps. But frequently those materials felt a little bit too young and also tended to require a level of vulnerability that our program really couldn't bear out when we only met with people weekly for 4-hour sessions. So they're at the job for 4 days, and then they come to us for about a half a day every week. come together. Some of them are in the same employer and some of them are not. And that's where we do our team building and our soft skills instruction. It also sometimes took the focus away from whatever was going on at the work site and stuff that they needed to talk through or process in order to be successful on the job. The other bucket of materials we inherited was career prep, which is probably very familiar to everybody. Solid info on resumes, great interview prep, a lot of scripted rehearsal stuff, breaking down the formatting of resumes and cover letters. What we found with those, awesome information again, but it skipped the confidence building steps in terms of pushing young people to start to reflect on, acknowledge, and get more confident in talking about the skills that they came to us with. And what we started to find is that a lot of our participants being out of high school for a little bit have had these experiences, have built some skills, have a lot, like a treasure chest of skills and life experiences, but haven't really had a structured place to like explore it and to be coached to talk about it a lot. And so that really felt like a gap. Next slide. So the problem was that there was no overarching framework. We had a lot of different cool materials, but they didn't feel very connected. And one of the problems with that also was that, you know, we have employer partners who take obviously their workplace policies and enforcement of those policies very seriously and are key to success on the job. Sometimes plunging into those policies and dealing with the high stakes nature of that felt really disconnected and sometimes even like a surprise compared to what we were doing and talking about every week. And then at worst, we had the risk of recreating trauma, of recreating disconnected or mixed messages, lack of transparency with a young person, and also asking a young person to invest in material that didn't like immediately respond to what they were going through. So those were some issues. What we saw again and again is participants kept telling us that one of the most or the most valuable part of the program for them was actually being a part of a cohort, was the bonding that they made with their peers during those 4 hours every week, and the relationships that they built that they took with them after the program. So we knew that no matter what, as we strengthened our soft skills coaching, we wanted to keep that cohort model and emphasis on that. Next slide. Okay, so here is where I'm going to start telling you guys about like the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm sort of an MHA evangelical in some ways. So my senior manager, Shakari Frazier, who's on this call, came back from a meeting or a conference with some materials from MHA. And at first I was like, okay, yeah, they're shiny, they're pretty, but isn't it just like yet another thing in the potpourri of things we do? But I sat down and spent some time with them, and I immediately was drawn to two things about them: how positive all the language is. The spotlight always seems to be on asking the youth what they're good at and doing something with that. And then also their skills framework was the first skills framework I had worked with where it was clear that it wasn't like specifically college prep, specifically academic, specifically generically work. And wasn't age specific. And y'all know 18 to 24-year-olds can be in a lot of different places developmentally. So that was really, really cool that it felt really elastic. Next slide. Okay, so the first thing that really got me excited was what y'all know about the 6 building blocks. And I just want to point out that for our program, and I'm telling our specific story just because that's the only story I know, but also because I know everybody probably is in a program where there's things that make you really unique, right? Where you can't use like a one-size-fits-all curriculum. So for us, we had a really big risk of like recreating some school stuff that our participants were specifically trying to get away from. So the thing I immediately started to notice when we used the building blocks and talked about them with participants is that these are written in a way where the adult staff members could easily they were kind of like an equalizer. Like the adult staff members could talk about what they're good at and what they're still working on. Because I'm not going to get an A in, you know, verbal communication and then like never have to repeat the class, right? Like I'm constantly working on all of these things. So immediately I saw that that really helped with relationship building and getting it away from that coach as the expert kind of vibe we had. Next slide. So the second of the 3 actual materials that I know y'all already know about that I'm just gonna like praise and say how it helped us is the hireability assessments. I loved that they already were set up to be posed to the youth, to the coach or mentor, to the supervisor. So there was that level of transparency right away in the materials where like the youth were not confused that, you know, we're giving them something to assess themselves on. We're also observing those same skills, and then we can have a conversation talking about the same thing together. Okay, next slide. Okay, the third thing, and if you haven't downloaded this yet and you like want more soft skills stuff, run to the printer and print it out. Maybe put it on black and white settings so you don't like bust a color printer toner. But this is amazing. You could be super tired and cranky and follow these directions and I think have a great lesson. There's 5 really cool activities and then there's one at the end that's for people who supervise youth. They're all about coaching young people to talk about what they're good at, how they got good at it, tons of evidence-based communication, both from the staff and the youth, constantly thinking about if everybody had your skills in the community, how would our community be better? Thinking about growth, lots of growth mindset stuff that's super like easy to implement, you know, talking about personal stories of mistakes and how those were lessons to grow. Okay, next slide. So back to my situation, 5 activities does not make a 6-month program. I loved everything I saw, but I really needed, again, some sort of through line, right? So what we ended up doing that helped a lot is first off, the toolkit has amazing extension notes at the end of every activity. So teacher steal alert, like I made at least, I'd say up to maybe 10 standalone activities that are really spin-offs. We have a mentoring activity that I linked for y'all. All these things I referenced are in resources that you'll have access to. And that was a spin-off from thinking about learn fails, how they phrase in the growth mindset concept, making mistakes and learning. The next thing that we did was we decided to use the 6 building blocks as the umbrella for our curriculum. We're like, there's no problem for this to be the overarching skills objectives. And then I was able to sit down with like all of our stuff and just say, okay, if I can't tell a young person that an activity we do addresses one or more of those 6 blocks, then it probably doesn't belong in our program. So that was an organizing principle that was pretty lovely. Next slide. Okay, so the takeaway activity that may connect with some of you, hopefully will, that I brought today is called the 360. It's called the 360 because there is feedback given and received all around. So it's a 30-minute meeting that happens twice during our program. And it's between one participant and all of the direct staff members who work with young people. So for us, that's 3 staff members sit down with each participant for 30 minutes, twice a program year. We had them do that on their own time at first. Don't recommend it. We do it in the programming day. It's paid time. We put our money where our mouth is. We say this is important. We give them time 2 weeks before to start to prepare. Next slide. So here are the objectives. The participant practices preparing for and leading a meeting. They look at role plays, they look at examples, and then they write the information that they will share in the 360 meeting. The participant reflects on their skills gained in programming. So this is both triumphs and challenges. The participant gives and receives feedback. And the participant clarifies and gets support for post-program plans. Next slide. So this is the agenda. It does not change. It's the same. Every time we sit down with each person, it is the same. I'm guilty of changing things all the time, making my life and others' lives crazy. And I'm very happy to report that this piece of success is because it doesn't change. There's 8 items in the agenda. Everything but the yellow thing is the participant's job. So again, 2 weeks before, we look at the agenda, we do some role plays, and our role plays, which y'all will see if you want to click on the activity link, is a role play of a 360 with evidence-based communication and one without, where people are saying stuff on both ends without examples. And then we have a conversation about those two different versions. So just really briefly, they introduce, they say what they expect is going to happen. They talk about the job-specific skills they've gained so far. They talk about the soft skills they've gained so far. And that's the moment where you get to have a lot of insight into whether or not the language you think you've been using is resonating with the young person. Constructive feedback to the program. Our senior manager, Shikari, has a really great prompt for that. If you had a magic wand, how would you make this program better for young people in the city? It tends to help with a little encouragement to give us some feedback that they won't be penalized for. Advice, one thing I wish I had known before I started this program, always gives us amazing ideas for the next round. And then we give them observations based on the hireability assessment and on the building blocks brought up, as well as conveying information from their supervisor about the same set of skills. And then the last 2 items are all about starting to talk about what does your life look like after the program, and what do each of us commit to doing at the end of this meeting to help support you finish successfully. Next slide. So added benefits, apart from this being one of our most powerful, I think, improvements in terms of youth-centered learning, is the staff benefits that I have observed. I've seen us increase our staff accountability. I know I became much more accountable to making sure that I covered the exact building block language, and that I expected to see some growth or some different reflection on the second 360. And it improved case management. I can't tell you how much that really did help. I don't know if other people have situations where more than one staff person's interfacing with a young person, sometimes about different things, sometimes about overlapping things. And if your data management system doesn't collect like basically everything in your life, like there's going to be some dropped balls possibly. So I have seen staff really clarify what's actually going on at the job and what's actually going on at home, to the extent that it's not confidential. That really helps us all get on the same page to help the young person. And next slide. All right, so in the program sequence, I'll go over this real quick, but basically just as a reminder, which has helped us make 360s like feel natural as possible, is that we always start in orientation, hitting the ground running with the MHA toolkit activities right away. The assessments are done by everybody. We call it like an uninformed knee-jerk assessment, because we want to try to let the youth know, like, look, watching you for a week does not make us like experts on your skills. This is what we've observed, and this is what we think we can help you get better at. Do you agree? And this has been really helpful for buy-in, just so that they know what they're getting into and they've agreed to it and they want, and you know, they want it. Then throughout the program, again, our activities are all linked to the building blocks. Our success coach debriefs with worksite supervisors regularly along similar language, as well as technical and worksite specific situations. So there's that information coming in for us too. And then next slide. And then that's my screenshot of our agenda, but it's the same thing that I showed you. The 360s happen twice during the program as sort of like a net to collect all that good stuff, to see, to check in with the young person to see how they're doing. And I think I have one more slide. Cool. So these are links. You should be able to click on them on the slides, as well as the follow-up email. I love talking about how to work soft skills into a lot of different settings. So if you want to reach out and talk to me about it, feel free. I left my email, and hope that wasn't too fast. Thanks.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Allison. That is just like, the information that you poured out is so valuable. it may not be all like critically brand new to people, but we can all definitely relate to a lot of it. And I know you shared some really new things for me as well. I just want to highlight one of the points for me that I think is such a great part of what you've done is by embedding these 360s at the beginning and at the end, and then the soft skills as the through line, it kind of encouraged or forced the soft skills to be present in all aspects of the program. And I think that's something like you have to do something structural with your program to make that happen. And so a tip of the cap for thinking through that process. Yeah, so we are going to, just so everybody knows, and for sake of time, we're gonna, Ramel is gonna present in just a moment. And then what we'll do at the end is anybody who wants to stick around and ask questions of any of us specifically, feel free to do that, but we don't want to necessarily stop now for questions for sake of getting through the bulk of the content. And again, if you need to, keep dropping something in the chat. So speaking of the chat, we do have another chat prompt for you. And this is just as an interesting thing I want to kind of get at is, do you use rubrics in your class or program? So either yes or no. And if you do, are they more often created? So do you create them, or are you borrowing them? Are you finding a rubric that aligns with what you're trying to do? You know, somebody once told me that education is the only profession in which stealing is like encouraged. So if you're borrowing, that's fine. And just, yeah, just drop in the chat for us. Do you use rubrics in your class or program? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Andreas. Cool. And as you're thinking of this, I don't want to steal too much of Ramel's thunder, but we're going to get into rubrics as a component of performance evidence. And this just goes back to skill building components that we talked about at the top of the hour, you know, of revealing the targeted skills, establishing evidence, setting expectations, etc. So with that, thank you all for your contributions. It seems like we have a mixed group, so that's great. So going to pass it off to Ramel, who's going to take it away for us. Whoops.
All right. So oftentimes, well, let me just give a quick context here. Obviously, today we've talked a lot about like the need for clear communication as a soft skill for both developing it and for achieving positive outcomes between our educators or facilitators and our young people. And then we've also talked about building up our programs with through lines with Alison's work at Earn and Learn. So here, right now, we're really discussing how we can use rubrics as a means for clear communication of expectations and how you can institute that in your program or double check what you've already got. So most of the time when we think rubrics, we get a vision of these like dense 4-column rubrics. I pulled a couple from some really masterful teachers that I've worked with over the years in the teacher fellowship. And we think of these like time-tested, long and intensive rubrics. However, rubrics really don't have to be deeply complicated or traditional in that way to be effective. Some educators, especially those of us who have to create our own scope sequences and programming timelines, we do things on short notice, and maybe we're new to a program or content area. So just keeping in mind what all quality rubrics have in common from what I've seen, it's that they have student-friendly language, because again, this is all about clarifying the performance, clarifying the expectation, observable action. And this is a key one. Sometimes the rubrics are used for outcomes like products. However, most times we should make sure that student action is something that's observable. And obviously in the case of rubrics used for an end product, that's particularly observable. It's just in one moment. And lastly, there should be some sort of continuity and gradual build of whatever the aspect is. So some may use them to evaluate student action, grade a project, or even in some cases for PBIS, but the basic functions of the rubric are to clearly communicate the expectations. And so that's why we have a continuity and gradual build. As a bonus, when it's done really well, it may include examples of student language or student products in the past, but we'll look at that as well. So let's look at 3 examples. We'll start with one that's more traditional. This rubric you see to the right is a collaboration rubric used in a biology class. And so, excuse me. And so for this class, the teacher identified 3 or 4 building blocks that were actually critical to biology at different times throughout the school year. So she laid out a timeline, or excuse me, laid out a sort of a gradual process in each level for each building block. And she provided opportunities for students to engage with the rubric throughout the content units. And we'll cover a little bit more on how she engaged later. Let's take a closer look, because I always love when I see people get closer to the screen. You can tell it was just a little too small. So 2 big things, looking from the left side, starting over there, to make this truly visible, in terms of demonstrating the ability to find different solutions, some of the teacher's work had to be edited to prompt students to actually write their solutions out or note when they had a problem. So again, you're doing something that allows the students to make the action visible and observable, because it's going to empower a young person to sort of self-check and say, am I on the right path? Or if someone challenges that they're on the right path, they can say, no, this is where I did X, Y, and Z. And that means they're owning their learning. Looking on the right side, please note that each one of these columns moving from left to right is a gradual build, or I guess moving from right to left is a gradual build. And in this case, it's not frequency or necessarily quality, it's about independence. So this teacher is building collaboration skills, essentially wanting students to do these things unprompted. And so this was an example of a traditional model rubric that kind of checked all 3 of the boxes we're talking about. Let's look at something a little different from here. Hi.
Hey Tom, how you doing? Let me try to quiet this down.
So with Miss, the second example, we had a 1 column rubric. This was used by Ms. Jenkins over at Warren Easton. So these are all current teachers and educators in our NOLA public school system. So this is a 1 column rubric. I love this one. So simple, so direct. So here the rubrics given to each of the students really early on in the project process. And she had students complete 3 projects over the course of this semester class. They had to research a company, do an actual report, like a written or typed report on the company's marketing plan, and then present their findings on the marketing plans of the companies to their class. So she gave this to the students early on to let them know this is where we're working with, this is where we're working in terms of improvement. And so she was able during their presentations to write quick notes on what she liked and what they were doing that she wanted to see even more of, and maybe some areas where she wonders how they can improve. And so this was a little bit loose. It wasn't high stakes in that way. It was about growing and getting better in your communication skills, going from organizing information that serves the purpose of your messaging, context, and audience, all the way through to some of the other steps that Nathan pointed out at the beginning. So the first presentations were ambitious and they were engaged, students were excited, but they were off the mark. And so she created this, or she pulled this rubric from another source and was able to change it just a little bit to give consistent feedback and explain it in a way that students understood it, and they were able to ask her questions. So yes, Mia, I'm pretty sure this is one of the teachers at Easton, but I think she worked with the woman who actually passed away, unfortunately, at the end of last year. So this is all about concise and simple feedback loops here with the 1 column rubric. This allows students to understand what's going on from the beginning and get feedback on it on the end. So let's look at one last example. We're going from sort of chunkier to looser. And here, this last one, super simple, was Mrs. Lumad over at Edna Carr. She's a biology 2 and AP biology teacher. And she really, she was in class, I was observing, and I think at some point she just decided, you know what, we're just gonna establish this on a chart paper, on a piece of chart paper, on a poster, because she understood what she wanted from students. She realized the students didn't understand what she wanted from them. So she sat down, made this chart paper, and had students just say, like, what does it look like? And I'm sorry, the framing here should be the soft skill. Let me explain that first. It was applies new or acquired knowledge, skills, and or strategies that one determines to be useful for achieving goals. And in AP biology, essentially what that means is knowing your resource that you need to go to find your answers. So they had to do a ton of research in this class. It was only about 10 to 15 kids. And most of their answers were not clear. They couldn't just like go to some quick notes. They needed to review notes, probably go to the document sources in terms of textbooks, or even to an online resources they had through Khan Academy. And so they went through, what does it look like to get to your work and really work through it? Starting the assigned task on time and not socializing, so on and so forth. Students literally came up with this, and she added a few things here and there. They posted it on the wall. And this was an example of their rubric of student action. Not much could be clearer in terms of observable action than this being posted and students being able to self-check or being prompted to check. So it's highly observable and focused on the actions relating to the process of completing their assignment and understanding how to apply the information that they had at their fingertips to getting things done. And so all three of these rubrics in practice, very different in how they were created and how they're used. But those three things always stand. Is it observable? Excuse me, is it in student language? Yes, in all three cases. Does it involve observable action? Yes, in all three cases. And does it have some sort of continuity or gradual build with the same topic or the same action or process? Yes, in this case as well. And so as we think about, there you go. As we think about using rubrics, there are two quick tips that I want to leave with you all. When you go to create your rubric, also be thinking about expectation cues. So on the far right, I want to point out here, this was after after a class online, a teacher, as you can see, I kind of like photographed from her class, essentially said, students, in that small group lesson, did you offer help? Did you accept any help? Did you ask for help? Or did you decline help politely? Because their class was all about collaboration, and they were trying to get students into working and helping each other rather than sort of doing their assignments in their little pod, because it's easy from home to just kind of get into what you're doing and not what the other people on the screen are doing. So the teacher prompted them at the end to do a little bit of metacognition. How did I do that? And did I do it to the expectation? On the flip side of expectation cues, at the bottom left, you've got a teacher who is in person. She taught ninth grade English, and they read a book called Marionettes, Inc. Great little short story. She has prompts for the students during their prep work and for their discussion, a space for them to write some notes and evidence of their performance and to rate themselves and their overall contribution. What's also notable is that the prompts under discussion relate back to the rubric she actually uses in the class. So she's giving them quick cue on performance. And then, as you all would imagine, young people, the first time or two, they're going to give themselves 5 stars, right? Or you may have a few, unfortunately, who give themselves 1. Then there's normalization over practice and use and going from the notes and evidence. And my favorite thing to see was a student argue out their 4 or 5 star rating with evidence. Because you know what? Even if it was a 2 or 3 in our eyes, if you can pinpoint the exact reasons why that you deserve the 5, that means you're already engaged. So remember expectation cues, and there's one other of the 2. So yeah, the other is student input and engagement. So when you're using your rubric, don't let it just be something that you hand out one time and then you give out at the end. I wanted to go back to Ms. Greer's class, the biology class. As an example, she had such a dense rubric that she used one line at a time. So she would have students at the end of a lesson say, like, jot your evidence of your skill performance, write it on the sides, write it on the back, circle actions you want to get into the next time. So again, this relates back to doing some sort of expectation cueing, but it also can be in a rubric saying, asking students or young people, hey, what does this sound like? And one of my favorite things that I didn't get to find a good example of was where students actually wrote in language under the rubric about what it would sound like. So if you are at a 0 in motivation, one of the funniest ones that I see is like, man, this assignment is blowing me. Yeah, that's what it might sound like if you kind of just give up and quit on the assignment. So when you make it real for students, they buy in more. So be mindful of engagement as well and input as you create the rubric and go to use it. And so that's what we got today. I hope these examples directly from educators in New Orleans public schools and youth facing work were helpful to you. We look forward to any sort of questions you might have, whether that's via email or in these options that Nathan's going to run over really quickly.
Yeah, so thank you, Ramel. That was great. We realized that we packaged a lot in a very short amount of time today, and our hope was that you have something that you can take away and implement, whether it's a communication strategy or something new, a new way of thinking about the communication building block, or if it's a way that you're struggling with integrating soft skills. Maybe Alison's segment kind of spurred you to think of a new way of doing it, or if it's rubrics, maybe Ramel got you thinking about implementing rubrics. One of the difficult things about this community of practice is that we have such a wide variety of attendees, and so it's hard to pinpoint. And so we just encourage you to come with an open mind and think about, okay, how can I take this and steal it and then convert it for my own benefit? So I want to thank all of you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We know what it means to take an hour of your time to be with us. The way you can contact us is on the screen. If you're interested in our Soft Skill Educator Cooperative, it's already full and rolling for this year, but if you have ideas or you want questions or have any thoughts, please contact Ramel. If you're a non-school based, so non-high school based, that being said, practitioner and you want more information, I know Alison mentioned something about the working impact and hireability assessment that may be new to you, or the Boss Your Skills pamphlet or set of tools, please reach out to me. Our next intro workshop is in March, and I'm going to drop the link to our survey. And we have very poor record of completion on these surveys, so please help us out. It's our own performance rubric, it's our own performance evidence, and if you can go ahead and go into that Google form that was just dropped in the chat and just give us some feedback on today's session and also some ideas for the future. All right, and if you want to stick around and ask questions, we'll be on the call for about another 10 minutes or so. But there we are at 1:59 and we're closing the deal. So thank you all so much. And yeah.
And I will interrupt quickly. I just want to let everybody know I've dropped the slides for today's session in the chat. So for those who are still here, those slides are available at the bottom.
Yes. And we'll also be compiling this recording and sending a follow-up email with more additional resources, etc. So, all right. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.